right, well, I think we have a good number of people here, 23 already, and I'm sure there'll be people joining us as we go along, but I'm going to go ahead and get us started this evening so that we can make the most of our time. Welcome, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Drembus, and I am the genealogist for the William and Mary Bray School Lab. In service to the lab's mission to uncovering, documenting, preserving, and disseminating the history and the legacies of the Williamsburg Bray School, we host a monthly series on Zoom in order to share recent genealogical findings, engage the descendant community in this work in order to broaden our understandings of those legacies. And we also enlist the help of historians, genealogists, as well as the general public in furthering the conversations and the research surrounding the Williamsburg Bray School. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. So, do this and share, and we'll go ahead and get started. There we go. Okay. So the series, the title of the monthly series is Bray School Stories. And this evening's focus is taking time to heal. So first, again, some housekeeping sessions or some housekeeping items. Once again, we are recording this session. It will be available later on our YouTube channel. To find it, simply Google Bray School Lab YouTube. If you prefer not to be recorded, please feel free to access this recording later from our YouTube channel. I want to let you know about an upcoming event. Annually, the William and Mary Bray School Lab hosts an annual conference called the Slate Seminar. This year, it will be held in person in Williamsburg on the campus of William and Mary. It's being held at the School of Education. It will be held October 25th and 26th, and you can use this QR code to register. And additionally, this year, contributors are invited to submit proposals for brief 15-minute presentations on an aspect of the history of the Williamsburg Bray School. The Bray School Lab staff will review the proposals and organize them into 2 different Slate seminars sessions to be held on Saturday, October 26th. And I want to let you know that the deadline for submitting a proposal is this Thursday, the 29th. The 2 themes are the Williamsburg Bray School, new questions and fresh perspectives. And the second theme is the past is now, personal stories of connection to the Williamsburg Bray School students. And I think, Tanya, were you able to put that in the chat, the link to register or to submit a proposal? So
Yes, I just put it in.
Perfect. So the link will take you to to be able to submit a proposal for a Slate seminar. The QR code on your screen is to register to be an attendant at the Slate seminar. So I'm going to go ahead. So that's coming up. We're really excited about that. We had some great participation last year. We look forward to an even bigger audience and participation and conversation this coming October. So our monthly sessions are designed to spark conversation. And I'm joined this evening by a very special guest, Dr. Janise Parker. She's Associate Professor of School Psychology and facilitator of the micro-learning course, HEAL, History Evoking Action and Liberation. We'll leave time at the end for Q&A. Questions can always be placed in the chat or just raise your hand. So let's get started. So why this topic and why now? It's something I've been thinking about for a while, and the work of the lab staff and students involve hearing a lot of stories and listening to stories shared by descendant community members. We're hearing stories of pain and distrust and harm, but we're also hearing stories of joy, determination, and excitement. A lot of my time is spent reading documents and being immersed in those records. And a lot of times those records have evidence of violence and inhumane treatment. There's a lot of sadness and there's a lot of despair. And so it affects me for sure. I'm only human. And it would be weird if it didn't affect me. And it affects also our students and our staff. And so we wanted to kind of explore, what do we do with these emotions? And do we hold space for them? And so just some examples that I have, and it's not about me, certainly, because we definitely want to talk about the Descendants and their experiences. But just some of those records, you just kind of stay with you for a bit, and those stories, and you just kind of stay, they kind of weigh heavily on the heart for a while. And I want to also share something that one of our students shared with me, because it's not all gloom and doom. A lot of it is just extremely inspiring. And so she's allowed me to read part of what she wrote. This is one of our students in the lab. After experiencing a lot of doing some oral history interviews, she said, "My respect for our narrators deepened immensely as I witnessed their willingness to engage with complex emotions tied to their histories. They have entrusted us with not only joyful memories, but also painful truths that challenge us to confront uncomfortable aspects of our past. And I'm truly humbled by this transformative experience." So that was just a reflection from one of our students about how this work is hard history. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. But I also wanted to ask Tanya to speak about her experience, both as an oral historian, as well as a member of the descendant community. So Tanya, you want to kind of share?
Hi, thanks, Elizabeth. Yes, as an oral historian, part of our um, job entails listening to the stories from the descendant community, and they can be hard to listen to, no matter what your positionality, right? Um, Many of them are elated, of course, to find out that they are members of the descendant community, or they have family members that were attached to a historic site. But then there is also pain and trauma. And so for oral historians, we have to practice self care, because listening to those stories definitely takes an effect on you. Especially for myself, because then I have to edit those videos. And so I'm hearing that over and over and over again. And then because of my story and my connection to the Williamsburg Bray School, finding out how I'm connected to the enslavers that sent students to the school, how I found out that members of my family are members of the descendant community of Charles City County. So when I'm having when I'm conducting those oral history interviews, and those descendant community members are talking about that trauma and pain, I'm feeling that right along with them. So that makes it very hard. It's very emotional, because this is hard history. Many of my descendant community members end up crying, and I want to cry with them, so I have to hold that back and then save it for another time, because um, I admire them so much for being vulnerable with me, for exposing themselves with me, for sharing their stories. I have been delighted to do this job, to share this journey with them. But absolutely, at some point, as oral historians, whether they have a connection or not, they have to practice self care because of the job that we do and listening to these stories.
Thanks, Tanya. I know you and I've had conversations in the office just about, kind of just sitting with some of these feelings and emotions and just, wow, what do we do with them? And that's just, that's you and me. That's you and me in the office. But we've had needs and emotions expressed by our lovely and generous descendant community members. I pulled some quotes, some things that the community had said at different activities in the year. And, they really are being generous with their time. They're being extraordinarily truthful, even when it's painful. And so these are some of the things that they had brought up to us. They wanted space for reflection on this hard history. We know that we may be asking questions that don't have comfortable resolutions. And, we always want to be able to just kind of tie everything and have it all kind of taken care of and have the easy answers. But in this work and in this topic, sometimes there just aren't easy answers. Things are complex, and it takes a little bit more of a deep dive, and it takes a little bit of time of just kind of sitting with that. They wanted to know that we had genuine care and concern for the community. And so that's what part of this evening is all about, is really, kind of listening to that. So these were some wants and needs expressed by descending community members. I was also struck as I went back through the comments that have been kind of bubbling up to the surface about feelings and emotions during these Zoom sessions. This was originally intended for me to be able to share the research so that we were being very transparent with research findings. And what we have found is through these conversations, we're creating this space that has happened lovely and organically for people to really be vulnerable and to share kind of where they are and where they're feeling with some of this. Some of it's, and it's not just the descending community members, but other participants in these sessions. And some of it's joy and some of it's pain. Many times it's tears of gratitude, tears of sorrow, as well as tears of frustration. So that's just what's been coming up from the Zoom sessions. And then I was also able to pull these from, with the help of Tanya's interns, was able to find just what was coming up out of those oral histories. As Tanya mentioned, she's sitting with them and she's asking the questions, and these are some of the emotions and the feelings that are coming up. And we talked last month about how the oral histories are helping us with the research, and they certainly are. But we're also getting this other thing, these feelings and these emotions. And so what tonight is really what I was hoping for was that, there's a lot of emotions, both energizing and at times fatiguing, being brought to the surface in our work. And again, what do we do with these emotions? It's one thing for me to be on these sessions and say, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, yes, we feel for you. And oh my gosh, yes, this is so hard. But do we hold space beyond that for these feelings? And beyond acknowledging them, how do we honor them? And we know that going forward in the months ahead, as we get closer to the opening of the school and as more research is uncovered and documented, what are some healthy ways that we can kind of maneuver through these? How do we go beyond simply acknowledging the emotions? What do we do to ensure that we move through them in healthy ways? Well, I'm not the person who has the resources or the knowledge on how to do that. But very fortunately for us, Dr. Janise Parker is the person who can help us with some of these things. And I want to go ahead and introduce her fully. Janise Parker takes a healing approach to understanding the intersection of history and current practices to inform services that help communities to thrive and grow. Her research focuses on culturally responsive mental and behavioral health services, socio-cultural factors and positive youth development, especially among Black K-12 students, and religious and spiritual diversity among marginalized youth. As a licensed psychologist and researcher focused on multicultural practice, Dr. Parker has consistently trained students to respond to the needs of diverse populations by providing holistic mental health care for youth and families, and by producing scholarship of impact. So Janise has the expertise and the tools that I don't have to help us. And so I invite her at this point to facilitate this dialogue. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and go ahead and make you a co-host.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And hello to everyone. I am immensely grateful and humbled to be here and to provide hopefully some strategies that you may find to be helpful, as kind of emphasize a little bit in my bio. I will say I do not take this work that I do for granted. I do believe that it is a sacred honor that I was called to do. And so again, I just want to say hello to everyone and thank you for welcoming me into this space. So just to kind of make sure that we are all on the same page, I do want to highlight that tonight's session is more about education, right? So providing some examples, some strategies, some tools, things that we can do to get to a healing space versus it being kind of therapy, if you will. I do want to make sure that we are mindful of what we share. Of course, it is recorded. It will be made available in a public space. And so confidentiality cannot be guaranteed. And not saying that this will occur, but just again to make sure that I cover my bases, right? As a licensed psychologist, please know that I do have the ethical and legal responsibility to report any statements related to harming self or others. Again, don't think that will surface in this space, but in the event that it does, just know that I do have a responsibility to report that. And then, as been emphasized earlier, I encourage you to honor your feelings. There's no feeling that's right or wrong. I loved how Elizabeth normalized that through the quotes. There may be joy, anger, sorrow, frustration, all wrapped up in one. And so please, please, please know that it is okay to lean into the complexities because this is a complex topic. And then if you need to take breaks as needed, as I'm kind of sharing these things, please do so. So let's kind of normalize the emotions and really think about the context in which all of this is occurring. And we know that the context in which all this is occurring goes back to racism, right? Racism, when we think about how it's defined, I think oftentimes I find that the easier route to take is to kind of hover here and think about it being more about interpersonal, individual acts of discrimination, kind of that one-to-one exchange, things that are said, things that are done, versus kind of looking at it holistically and recognizing the structural nature of racism in a sense to where racism does and can occur at the system level, and it is embedded in institutions. So when we think through policies, practice, and so forth, so when we think about the institution of slavery, but then as a byproduct, the Bray School, there were certain messages that were conveyed, right, to perpetuate racism, the idea that Black students, Black families, the Black scholars of the Bray School were inferior to their white counterparts. So we're not just looking at the individual piece. Again, we're looking at a real attempt to embed it in the fabric of an institution that was well organized and designed for that reason. We are seeing more dialogue in the mental health community regarding racism being a public health crisis. And I would say we saw an increase, especially after the murder of George Floyd, where there's more conversation among scholars, but then also institutions such as the American Public Health Association, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and recognizing that racism has a profound impact on us all. It impacts our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health, behavioral health, and spiritual health. And so we have to be in a position to have those uncomfortable conversations to figure out how do we all heal together as a collective. There are some other concepts that you may have heard, or as I'm reading it, you're like, okay, that makes sense, right? I'm putting a name, a term, if you will, to what I'm feeling. And so two related concepts include racial battle fatigue. And this is just this kind of cumulative result of encountering racism, reading about racism, especially when you think about all the stories that you're exposed to through the Bray School. And over time, it really can put one in a position to just feel that physical, mental, and emotional strain. So feelings of just I'm just tired, I'm exhausted, right? It's fatigue. We also know, similarly related to that, this idea of racial trauma, right? Race-based traumatic stress. And again, this is just that intense mental and emotional injury that can occur when we're constantly encountering racism. And it doesn't necessarily have to be racism in the present. It can be what many people have shared in relation to the Bray School by, again, just being exposed to those stories over and over and over again. Now, as we link the past to the present, because again, these are events when we think about the Bray School that happened way beyond our time or before our time, but yet they're impacting us today. So some things that other scholars have kind of said is this idea of post-traumatic slave syndrome, right? Where we're still being impacted by the harms of slavery. It comes up in our day-to-day lives, even if we don't notice, right? Maybe it's things that are said, or again, these institutions that are probably perpetuating some of the same narratives and ideology, even if it's a little more subtle in nature. Similar to that, historical trauma, again, recognizing that we can still be traumatized by the past, especially when you think about it from a family standpoint, right? Perhaps there were ways of coping that were passed on. I know that I've heard quite a bit of stories of elders, and especially Black families that may not speak of these things because it's too painful. And in not speaking of it, it doesn't kind of give space for individuals to process what they're experiencing, right? So overall, just kind of seeing how it is very much so normal to be impacted by what you are experiencing. And it's nothing to be ashamed of because it is real. These are real people with real stories, right? With burdens, with joy, all of the above. And so it is kind of expected. And these are just some examples, right, of how you may see the tension, if you are experiencing tension related to the Bray School impacting you at a physical level, right? We know that for Black communities, communities of color especially, who encounter racism, that there are a host of physical ailments, which is why we are having more dialogue about racism being a public health crisis related to that, right? So stress eating, substance use and abuse, sleep difficulties, high blood pressure, right? You may notice that there are some bodily reactions that you're having when you're listening to the stories, when you're exposed to the stories, right? There may be some real things that are happening to you at a physical level in relation to the stress and the emotional toll that comes with exposure to all of these kind of stories. Again, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Mental health implications, right? We heard a little bit of this earlier. Things like depression, anger, stress, other things, other mental health disorders, particularly in relation to prolonged exposure to racism and race-related content, things like eating disorders and low self-esteem. So again, I just shared that to show that there are scholarly research findings that again normalize this idea that what people are experiencing is real. I wanted to lean into this a little bit too. And I'm so glad that you mentioned this early, Elizabeth, about the frustration. When it comes to exposure to this content, anger is real. And I say anger is something to also normalize because, if you kind of grew up like me, you probably heard things like, be slow to anger, or you got to suppress your anger. But it's real. It's a valid reaction to violence and oppression. And in some ways, I would say it is a productive feeling. Now, of course, we'll move on to how do you channel that, but it's a productive feeling because oftentimes in our anger, it propels us, it moves us to want to do something and to want to act in the here and now. And so when that comes, again, lean into it, process it, but be mindful of when it can become disempowering. And we kind of say when it puts you in a space of being chained to the past, meaning that you're so angry to where you're never getting to a space of thinking about what's hope for the future? What does it look like, right, to do something? And so at some point, I would encourage you to think about, how do we honor our anger, but then shift that to acts of love, where we're coming together as a community, where we're demonstrating compassion for others, I would say on all sides, and that's not always easy, where we're inspired to share our stories, to teach others, to listen, so that we can understand where we are coming from. Something that I have, started doing, and again, this comes with time. When I think about people who we would consider to be oppressive, right? In the 21st century, some things I say is, people are products of their environment, and sometimes it's hard for people to see another way, to see through another lens. But if I do have an opportunity to connect with someone who is open, who want to learn, how do I sit with them in that space? And if I'm only sitting in anger, it can make that dialogue difficult. Now, again, I don't want to romanticize it. It's not always easy. I feel anger and frustration too. It's what propels me to do this work as well. But again, it's getting to this place of, how do we go from anger to love, to heal as a community? So let's think about coping, right? And coping, Tani, you mentioned this earlier, having kind of self-compassion, engaging in self-care, right? Different things that we may do to take care of ourselves, to manage all the heavy emotions that we're feeling when we're having conversations about the Bray School, when we're connecting the Bray School to the 21st century, right? So thinking about things that we can do. So there are three categories of, I guess, self-compassion, self-care strategies that we like to think about. Interventions for the mind, interventions for the body, and interventions for the spirit, recognizing that all three are connected. So for the mind, there are some things that we can do, things like mindfulness. And really that's allowing yourself to decompress, sit in the moment, perhaps through quietness, being attentive to what's happening without thinking too far about the past, too far into the future, but it's just being. And so that can have a very soothing impact on the mind, but also the body, because it allows us to kind of just take that time to take a step back and just be in the moment versus having our minds and feelings wander 24/7. Other things that may be helpful is what we call intellectual stimulation. Again, taking our time away from maybe the heaviness related to this content and doing other things that bring us joy. Reading about maybe nonfiction, right? So things that are not so heavy. I know for me, I don't know if I would call this intellectual stimulation, but it's mindful stimulation. I love reality TV, right? That is my time to turn off, to see people's drama, but it's just something that I do, so I'm not always exposed to the heaviness that comes with doing this work. Other things you probably heard about is journaling, writing, creating art, because it does, again, it gives yourself permission to slip into kind of another a space, if you will, another mental space. And then this is actually a strategy where some people actually schedule their worry time. So from this time to this time, I'm going to allow myself to feel what I feel, right? This is my time to process and so forth. But from this time to this time, I'm turning off, right? And so that's actually a strategy. And again, it takes some practice, especially if you're someone who's just a constant worry wart, but you are giving yourself permission to almost put boundaries in a container around when you kind of lean into these heavy emotions. Interventions for the body, right? Taking care of ourselves physically, it does have mental health benefits, right? So thinking about nutrition, health, physical activity, visualizing yourself, and then scheduling physical breaks. Again, this goes back to, that space that we can create around, this is my time where I'm going to be heavy involved in this work, and then this is when I turn off. And again, you really have to commit to that and honor that space of saying, this is when I'm cutting off, and that's what it is. And then for the spirit, there's a term also, I didn't put this up there, but it's called spirit murdering. And this term is the idea that, again, when we are exposed to so much trauma, including racism, it kind of sucks the life out of our spirit. And so even as we're nurturing our mental well-being, interventions for the mind and our body, how are we feeding our spirit, right? That inner core that informs how we view the world, how we show up in the world, all of those things. And so we may do that through things like prayer, meditation. We may do that, but just connecting with earth, right? I start my morning, especially now that the kids are at school. Yes. Um, I start my morning walking for an hour, and it is a time when I reflect, when I meditate, when I'm just out in nature. But it is very healing and it's soothing as well. Creativity, expressive arts, that does have kind of a soothing aspect because, again, it allows us to tap into something deeper in nature. So I wanted to show an example of something that I've recently, in the last few years, have leaned into to feed my spirit and my mind, is what we call artivism. And artivism is a way to kind of, again, express our inner feelings through art. It is something that is connected to what we've seen historically, where, people, especially marginalized communities, have used things like art and music to tell their story, to release the heavy emotions, and to inspire social change. So this is actually a picture that I created. It was a few years ago. And, I was really sitting in this space of saying, like, what does freedom mean to me? What does liberation mean to me? How do I honor my authentic self? And so I just kind of just allowed my mind and my spirit to be in the moment. And so I kind of drew this picture of these are my hands, my little hands. And I drew this picture of chains being broken. And it was interesting, as I was painting, I had music on, and just out of the blue, there was this song that came on about freedom. And so as the song was playing, I was painting, and it really did have this soothing kind of feeling. And it's a picture that I revisit often, especially when I'm sitting in a space of, again, what does freedom and liberation mean, not just for me, but for others that I am connected with. And so you don't have to be an artist. I am not an artist. But again, it's something that allows ourselves to tell our story, to process our story, and sometimes in concrete ways. Here's some other examples. This is a group that I did with Black women at William and Mary, where they kind of painted the ways in which their spirituality helped them to kind of navigate and resist the harms of oppression. And so you can see here, just as I shared, they talked about art being a form of resistance, to get their feelings out, how art allows them to kind of put all of these things on a canvas and to make things more concrete. So that's just an example of some things that you can do, thinking about interventions for the mind, the body, and the spirit. And so I would encourage you, in this space, to think about your go-to strategies. Is there anyone who's willing to share? And again, no pressure, but is there something that I shared, or maybe something else that's connected to those three categories that you have found to be especially helpful as you engage with this work through the Bray School Lab? And again, no pressure. Denise, did you want to share?
Yes, you pointed out a couple of good points about prayer, meditation, spirituality.
Mhm.
Those are just wonderful things for a whole life's existence and reduce stress,
Mhm.
anger, tension, anxiety.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I have found that very, very useful just in my general life,
Yeah.
focusing and meditating on scripture.
Yeah.
And by the way, the Bible does not promote racism,
Mhm.
and the Bible does not condone enslaving Black people. as some religions have taught. So I want to throw that out there. There is no racism connected to the African people, which our descendants are in this country. So throwing that away and embracing the holistic parts of the scripture that are healing, I have found very helpful.
Thank you so much for sharing, Denise. Let's see, Jonette.
Jonette's hand is up. Yep.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
When our family was involved with doing a presentation for the Lemon Project, at the end of that presentation, I think 2 years ago, we all decided to take a break and just not formally commit to being a part of anything because there was so much heaviness at the end of it. That doesn't mean that individually some of us haven't still participated in various activities, but I find talking to somebody else who's had or having those same emotional experiences, because it is very, very emotional. And I'm one of those people that cried with Tanya. I'm one of those people who I don't know. I got frustrated. Uh, one of the meetings we had with Elizabeth, we found Dorcas Jones. I'll never forget that night. We found Dorcas Jones on a census, and we know that the last name was associated with the Bray School. And then I got really frustrated because beyond her father, Daniel, I haven't been able to find a great deal of information. So anger set in because I didn't know where to go or what to do, and not knowing where people are, and having that cemetery right for the church, right behind the Bray School, is sort of a moving experience as well.
Yeah.
And having been told that we weren't gonna DNA test any of the bodies, like, I'm really angry about that. The fact that I can't say they don't want to. The fact that we're not DNA testing any of the bodies leaves me consternated, because how can you tell me that you can't take DNA from any of those bodies from the 1800s when just last week or the week before they were able to extract DNA from bodies from the 1600s out at Jamestown. So I waffle or waver in between emotions because are you lying to me? Are you telling me the truth? Is this more of let's exploit the people that are from here? It goes full circle. And for healing, walking through the historic area, I do it with different eyes now. Now I people it with people who look like me. For 50 years, I peopled it the way I saw it when I was 10, and riding my bike through and having tourists say things that weren't necessarily positive, and feeling like I didn't belong. But now I know, it's my home. How dare you?
That's it. That's it. That's it. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for those who shared, and then those who are, again, sitting and thinking about what you're doing. And one of the things you mentioned, Jonette, and I'll actually bring this up in a few minutes, is the idea you all probably have heard this phrase, rest as resistance, right? And so giving ourselves permission to lean out. There's not a certain time frame that comes with that, but it's giving ourselves that permission to say, you know what, right now I'm not going to engage. I'm going to take this time to rest, to heal, to kind of not be so much in that, and that's definitely a strategy as well. And I would say one of the reasons why we really are leaning into this idea of resting, especially for individuals in the Black community, is just because we know our ancestors did not get that latitude and that luxury to rest, right? And sometimes I imagine the kids at the Bray School who probably went to kind of a full day of school only to come back and have to labor and toil, right? And so now in the 21st century, when we do have that autonomy to say, I'm not doing this in this moment. That is a coping strategy. That is a resistance strategy, because that contributes to our thriving and not just our survival. Related to that, I want to shift us as we kind of come to an end, but I do have a couple more slides, I promise, is thinking about from going to coping to resistance. And there is a term that we are using quite a bit in the mental health field called radical healing. And so when we think about healing, healing is a concept that scales up coping. It scales up coping by moving beyond the goal of merely surviving, so managing our emotions within an oppressive society, but then choosing to thrive, right? More days than not. And not saying that every day is going to be, roses and sunshine, but it is a space of consciously saying that I want to survive, I will thrive, I will move in my authentic self, right? I choose joy more often than not when I can, right? And I'm engaging in things to get me to that space. So in terms of kind of radical healing, we know that there are three kind of general core tenets, right? Things to get us to that space. And so the first one is it's this duality where we acknowledge the oppression. So again, the racism and the pain, but we also lean into hope for the future. And the idea is that if we stay in any of those two extremes, that it doesn't contribute to our thriving, right? If we only think about the future, then in some ways we're daydreaming so much to where we're not dealing with the realities, right, of what we're experiencing. Again, we don't want to suppress our feelings and our emotions. We want to give life and truth to what we're experiencing. But at the same token, if we only sit in those negative feelings and in the oppression, then over time, again, thinking about racial battle fatigue, depression, stress, heart disease, all of those things, it can leave us in a very bad state. And so we want to acknowledge what we're experiencing, the racism that's occurring in the past and now, but we also want to give ourselves permission to dream. Because when we give ourselves permission to dream, it does propel us to, again, to do something, to imagine a future where we are working as a collective, where we have power to make concrete change. Always tell people I'm a dreamer myself. I dream quite a bit. Dreaming is what kind of got me to this space. And so when we think about hope for the future, you may be dreaming about, being involved in civic engagement and outreach work, right? Recognizing that how we treat people who are on the margins, it is connected, right? To, again, that structural oppression, structural racism. And so your dreaming may be, providing financial resources. Your dreaming may be contributing to the holistic health of people. Maybe you're someone who wants to mentor young kids. I saw that the Descendants, I think a year or two ago, talked about what about the mental health of Black children now, right? Mentorship, empowerment, that's contributing to the mental health. And so maybe in your dreaming, as you're having hope for the future, you're part of that narrative of moving people to a better place by engaging in civic engagement. It brings you joy, it brings you hope, and it helps you thrive, but also others thrive as well. Maybe your dreaming is around political action, right? Perhaps you're calling the media, emailing the media, voting, attending to a protest, right? Having conversations with others who have power to make policies and changes. Again, when you allow yourself to dream, you can say, what is my role in this, right? How am I kind of contributing or striving to contribute to the greater good? And all of that to say, we know that when you are engaging in meaningful work, it does promote this sense of thriving, this sense of joy, this sense of living in your authentic self. And there isn't a greater feeling than that. Some other things, this is why I talked about rest as an act of resistance, joy as an act of resistance, authentic living. I think about how, especially for marginalized communities, how dating back to slavery, how we've had to suppress different parts of who we are. Don't say things this way. You got to look a certain way. You got to embrace certain standards, right? All of those things, again, spirit murdering is toxic to the soul. But when you freedom dream, you may say, I may not be someone who's going to protest. That I know for me, that's not kind of my style. But of course, don't judge anyone who does choose that route. But maybe you choose, you know what? I'm going to live authentically. I'm going to immerse myself in so much joy to where I'm not giving racism and oppression the power to take that away from me. Other things just goes back to coping, but maybe using again writing and art and even media as a tool, right? For social justice. I know we're seeing that a lot right now, right? Social media is on fire, right? And so maybe that's a way that you tell your story, you choose to thrive, and you invite others to come on board with you. Another strategy, again, is honoring our ancestors. This goes back to what others, some of the quotes around, looking at the joy, the ways in which our ancestors reclaimed their humanity, right? Where they found ways to heal despite the circumstances that they were in. And so when we look at narratives of previously enslaved people and in the historical documents, things like social gatherings, right, where they were intentional through things like dancing and singing and reclaiming their humanity. I know that when I started in this work, the Bray School, one of my dear colleagues said, Janise, I was worried about you when you started to engage in this work. I was worried that the emotions would be so heavy to where it would take a toll on you. And she said, but when I see you kind of talk about this work, I also see light. And I would say part of that is because I also, and when I created this course, I leaned into the love and light, the stories of reading about, enslaved people again, dancing and coming together and getting together and loving on each other. I lean into that just as much as I lean into the negative piece. And when I see that, that does put me in a space of thriving, because I say if my ancestors can do it, then I can do it too. I can choose those moments of joy. This goes back to what you shared earlier, Janise. We know that people leaned into their religion and spirituality, not an oppressive based spirituality and religion that was communicated through the Bray School, but one of liberation, of hope, of thinking about the Exodus story, right? And how that connected to their hope for the future, and so forth. And so we can learn from our ancestors who found ways to heal and take that to empower us in the 21st century. Other things we know that enslaved and free Black people did, right? They created spaces that were healing. Again, they found ways to maintain hope and joy. And then there were many that challenged systems of oppression through political action, advocacy, again, civic engagement, by coming together and figuring out ways to keep each other lifted. I recently read a book about the individuals who, oh, I'm blanking. I don't ran away. The term will come back to me, but it was individuals who chose to live a life of freedom, even under extraneous circumstances and so forth. And I don't know why that term is slipping me, but thinking about those things have kind of helped me to be in a state of thriving. And then not just thinking about those that kind of lived during the period of slavery, but you may think about your current ancestors, elders in your community, in your family. What are some wisdom and teachings that they have shared that you still hold? And it's almost like you treat it like a container, right? Where you may create a collage of the legacy, the resistance, or you may just concretely hold all of those lessons to dear to your heart, and that helps you to thrive by going back and seeing, wow, this is how grandmama did it, and grandpa and uncle and so forth. And so I give an example here. I remember some of the women in my family, right? This is the diplomatic version of what they said. But one of the and so I won't say this because this is recorded. We can have that in a private conversation. But one of the things that I've often heard the women in my family say, I'm not going to let oppressors stress me out, right? I'm not going to do that. And I think I still hold on to that when I see things that are happening, when people may have little sly remarks, or I'm thinking about, the things with the Bray School, I say, I won't let this stress me out. I will not give like to that. And again, it's going to impact me, right? I don't want to act like as if this work is not kind of a burden to carry, but it's more days than not saying, I will not let this kind of take my spirit away when I engage in this work. Elders have also encouraged us in our family, honor your passion, to live authentically, to do the work that brings you joy, right? I do that every day. I always say the things that I do doesn't feel like work because it's a part of my authentic self, and I give myself permission to do that. Um, my grandmother and grandfather, we just celebrated my grandfather's 90th birthday, and so people were sharing stories of their legacy. And of course my grandmother, she passed years ago, but as they talked about their legacy, everyone was talking about how they were a couple that gave to others and they took care of others. And so it wasn't just verbal teachings, it was the way in which they modeled that to us. And when we think about the power of collectivism and helping us all thrive, I lean into that as well. And then finally, as you've heard me say this term over and over again, we cannot do this work alone. We thrive when we heal together, when we hold space for each other's feelings, the good, the bad, the ugly. Maybe it's friends, maybe it's family members, maybe it's significant others or colleagues who you hold dear to your heart. But that is a way to resist, to thrive by coming together through collectivism. And then finally, we can do that through coalition building. And that's when a group of people come together in the community and they decide that as a group across spectrums, across different cultural backgrounds, different professional backgrounds, that we're going to come together and we're going to work and strategize to heal the community. I see that happening with the Bray School, the Descendants coming together, all of the leaders of the Bray School, scholars and students, right? We're building this coalition where we're deciding what the future looks like. How do we heal through this work? How do we tell the story? How do we make sure that the story is not forgotten, especially in CW, right? I love how you said, Jonette, I see myself in that, right? I belong there. These are my stories. These are my ancestors. And so we're doing that as a coalition through the Bray School. And then I'll just kind of put this up here again. It'll be recorded so you can stop and look at it. But it just kind of shows what is a good coalition. What are we doing, right? We're focusing on local issues. We're building assets together, and we're helping people come to a resolve. And so I think that is a perfect way to end. I would have you think about this and not describe it in the event of time. But I think, again, when we think about the Bray School Lab and everyone involved, you see I'm smiling. This is, a real smile, because I think we are doing that. We are building a beautiful coalition. And hopefully, as we continue to work as a collective, it will take us to a place of figuring out how do we thrive and how do we choose to thrive in doing this work, even when the heavy kind of emotions come. Where's the joy that we hold on to as a group, and how do we honor that as well? So that's all I have. Always willing to have conversation. I know I only had a short period of time, but I do wish nothing but joy, liberation, freedom, community, and love for everyone that's here on this Zoom call.
Oh, thank you so much, Janise. Thank you. Round of applause, whether we're muted or not. I definitely wanted to make sure there were some comments in the chat, but I also received a text from someone who wasn't able to access the chat, and she gave me permission to read it. She said, and Bonnie, hopefully you're still on the call. She said she wants to ditto everything that Jonette said. And she and I had an opportunity where we were working one-on-one in the lab. And she says, I still have not been able to look at that deed since I was in the office with you, because it's just, it was a pretty powerful moment. And so thank you, Bonnie, for reminding me of that and sharing kind of how you are coming to this, and kind of just the feelings that are arising for you. We've got a few things in the chat I just wanted to raise to the group. Vicarious trauma is real. And Kristen Hill wrote, I've been reflecting on this quote from Colleen Jerkowitz Dorman. Solitude is not selfishness. Contemplation is not idleness. To withdraw does not mean to run away. So thank you for sharing that. And then Johnette wrote, whenever Adam Canaday drums, I try to be present. It's healing for me to feel his drumming. I know he knows the history and feels it too. The Travis house is surprisingly comforting as well. And that means Maureen, Elizabeth, Tanya, and Nicole. Okay, I'm going to choke up now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Anybody wants to share at this point, please feel free. This has just been a real special evening and a special conversation and topic that I very much wanted to bring up within this group. So,
Elizabeth, there was one question. Oh, I don't know if it's a question. Ann Berry, self-liberated, and maybe she's asking because she's wanting an explanation of that term. I don't know if she's still on the call.
I do see her there.
Okay.
And do you want to maybe clarify a little bit or contribute? Oh, okay. She's writing that self-emancipated is what she meant. I think it was when Janise was talking about. Was that the term you were maybe looking for?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I know what I was thinking of. I was thinking about what I just read that has been inspiring. The Maroons. I just read a book on the Maroons, and again, that's just part of kind of the ways in which our ancestors found ways to resist and so forth. So that has been a part of kind of my joy, if you will. And again, I never try to romanticize things, but just kind of seeing the strength and the fortitude that our ancestors had to reclaim their humanity and their autonomy. So yes.
Anyone else? I want to be mindful of our time together and have a few other last minute things to share. But I don't want to leave this conversation if we're not completely done yet. Okay. So I do want to thank you all for being here this evening. This is an exciting journey, and it continues to be a journey for us in the lab. And I'm glad that you all are now a part of this journey with us. This has been a tough topic. It's been a necessary conversation. Although the way that Dr. Parker presents it, it's also been joyful to hear about different ways to think about and help with these emotions and the feelings. For those of you who are local in Williamsburg, and if you're interested in additional opportunities around this topic, I happen to notice through social media that All Together Williamsburg is going to be hosting a speaker tomorrow, a speaker from the Racial Trauma Subcommittee of the Greater Williamsburg Trauma Informed Community Network. So if you want a little bit more about this conversation, it's going to be tomorrow evening, August 27th at 6:30 p.m. at St. Martin's Church at 1333 Jamestown Road. And according to what they put out about this event, this group works to help people gain confidence in discussing racial identity and racial experiences as it relates to historic and collective trauma, and to be able to facilitate conversations with others. And they said that they will have an activity and a discussion session as part of tomorrow's session. So I lift that up to the group as another opportunity. And that really is the conclusion of our our session this evening. We will be back with a new session next month, Monday, September 30th, at 6 o'clock. And certainly please stay in touch with us, either through our website or signing up to receive our weekly newsletter called Bray School Bulletins. We are affectionately calling 2024 the year of the Bray School. The restored Williamsburg Bray School building will open in the fall. I believe the date is November 1st in Colonial Williamsburg. There's a lot of excitement in the months leading up to and surrounding that event. And also as we acknowledge tonight, it's a lot of excitement, but there also may be other feelings about that as well. And all of those are absolutely valid. Certainly the research is going to continue well beyond 2024 as we work toward discovering the descendants of all the children who attended the Williamsburg Bray School. So, well, we're not going anywhere after the opening of the building. So thank you all again for being here. It really is, Tanya mentioned, she used the word privilege, and it is really a privilege to be a part of this project, to be a part of this group that has become really special to me, these monthly sessions, things that I learn from the people who come and share. It's just, I am enormously grateful. So thank you all for being here, for generously sharing your time as well as your wisdom with the group. So I hope you all have a wonderful, restful, healthy evening, and we look forward to seeing you soon. So thank you so much.